He fed a starving bobcat kitten, and years later, it came back with something. What began as a small act of kindness to a helpless animal turned into a life-altering twist no one could have seen coming. The man thought he was saving the kitten, but, in truth, that moment bound them together in ways that would shake his entire world. Now, when the bobcat reappears, it doesn't come alone. It carries with it secrets buried deep in the shadows. Secrets powerful enough to destroy lives, expose corruption, put the man himself in grave danger. As the wild predator becomes his unexpected ally, the line between fate and survival blurs. What did the bobcat bring back after all these years? And how will one man's forgotten act of compassion unleash a storm that could change everything? Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. It turns this little corner of the internet into something bigger, something shared. The late autumn sun cast long shadows across Caleb Harlow's weathered auto repair shop. The metal building, with its faded blue paint and rusty corners, stood as a testament to better days gone by. Inside, Caleb wiped his oil-stained hands on a rag that had seen too many cleanups to count, his tired eyes scanning the nearly empty garage bay. Only one car waited for repairs today, an old Chevy with a blown head gasket that its owner probably couldn't afford to fix. The sight made Caleb's chest tighten. His own bills, stacked neatly in a drawer of his desk, told a similar story of mounting troubles and dwindling hope. "We just need to make it through winter," he muttered to himself, though the words felt hollow. Even as they left his lips, the bank's latest notice had made it clear 3 more missed payments, and they'd take everything, including the small house his father had built with his own hands 40 years ago. The sun was setting as Caleb locked up the shop. Rather than taking the longer route along the county road, he opted for the shortcut through the woods. The fallen leaves crunched beneath his work boots as he walked the familiar path, their earthy scent mixing with the crisp evening air. His mind wandered to darker thoughts with each step. At 45 years old, he'd watched as the small town around him slowly dried up. The bigger repair shops in the city, just 30 minutes away, had taken most of his business. Now he was left with just enough loyal customers to keep the lights on, but not enough to keep the wolves, or in this case the bankers, from his door. A sound broke through his troubled thoughts, so faint he almost missed it. Caleb stopped, holding his breath to listen. There it was again, a weak, desperate cry coming from somewhere in the underbrush. Following the sound, Caleb pushed through a tangle of brambles, his old jacket catching on the thorns. The crying grew slightly louder, leading him to a hollow beneath an old oak tree. There, barely visible in the growing darkness, lay a tiny form. Caleb's heart caught in his throat. It was a bobcat kitten, no bigger than his hand, its ribs showing through patchy fur. The little creature's eyes were glazed with hunger and exhaustion, its attempts at crying barely more than whispers now. "Where's your mama, little one?" Caleb whispered, though he suspected he knew the answer. He'd heard gunshots a few days back, poachers probably, who didn't care about hunting seasons or permits. Common sense told him to walk away. Wild animals were dangerous, even small ones. He had enough problems without taking on a dying bobcat kitten. But something in those clouded eyes reached straight into his chest and wouldn't let go. With trembling hands, Caleb opened his lunch pail. Inside was tomorrow's lunch, a turkey sandwich he'd made that morning, hoping to save a few dollars by not eating at the diner. He pulled off small pieces of the meat, tossing them gently toward the kitten. At first, the tiny creature could barely lift its head. But the smell of food sparked something vital, and slowly, painfully, it began to eat. Caleb kept breaking off small pieces, his own hunger forgotten as he watched life gradually return to those wild eyes. "Easy there," he soothed, his voice soft and low. "Too much too fast'll make you sick. Take it slow." The kitten's movements grew stronger with each morsel. Caleb stayed crouched there until his knees ached, feeding tiny bits of his sandwich too. The starving creature. As the last of the light faded from the sky, he saw the kitten's eyes focus properly for the first time, fixing on him with an intensity that made him catch his breath. Those eyes held something ancient and wild, yet there was also a flash of something else, a recognition, perhaps, or a connection that defied explanation. In that moment, Caleb felt something shift inside him, as if the simple act of sharing his meager lunch with this desperate creature had changed something fundamental in the universe. The kitten had finished the last of the turkey, and its tiny body trembled less now. Caleb knew he couldn't take it home. It was still a wild animal, after all. But he couldn't just leave it here, weak and defenseless. Using fallen branches and leaves, carefully built a small shelter around the hollow, creating a barrier against the wind and any predators that might come looking for an easy meal. The kitten watched his every move, no longer crying but alert, its amber eyes reflecting the last bits of daylight filtering through the trees. "That's the best I can do for now, little one," Caleb said softly. "I'll bring you something more tomorrow." If you're still here, he knew it was probably foolish to make such a promise. He could barely feed himself, let alone a wild animal. But looking at those eyes again, he knew he'd find a way. As he finally turned toward home, the weight of his own troubles settled back onto his shoulders. The bank wouldn't care that he'd helped a dying creature today. The bills wouldn't pay themselves. Yet somehow the simple act of showing kindness, of choosing compassion over practicality, had lit a tiny spark of warmth in his chest. Walking through the deepening darkness, Caleb thought about how life had a way of presenting choices when you least expected them. Today, he'd chosen to help something smaller and weaker than himself, despite every logical reason not to. He didn't know it yet. But that choice, that one small act of kindness, would set in motion events that would change not only his life but the lives of many others in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The stars were beginning to appear overhead as Caleb finally reached his small house. His stomach growled, reminding him that he'd given away his next day's lunch. He'd have to figure something out tomorrow, but now, he felt a peace he hadn't known in months. Sometimes he realized the right choice wasn't the practical one. Sometimes the heart knew better than the head what needed to be done. As he unlocked his front door, a faint cry echoed through the woods, stronger now, more assured. Caleb smiled, knowing that at least for tonight, because of him, one small creature would sleep a little warmer, a little safer, and a little less alone in the world. "Where's your mama, little one?" Caleb whispered, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he knelt beside the hollow. The kitten's eyes, clouded with exhaustion, barely registered his presence. Its spotted fur was matted and dirty, telling a story of days without care or nourishment. Every bit of common sense told Caleb to walk away. Bobcats were wild animals, dangerous even as kittens, but something in those dimming eyes called to him a familiar desperation he recognized from his own reflection each morning. "Can't just leave you here," he murmured, shrugging off his worn jacket. With gentle movements, he wrapped the small creature in the fabric, noting how it didn't even have the strength to resist. The kitten felt like nothing in his arms, a fragile bundle of bones and fading life. Back at his house, Caleb worked quickly. He heated some milk on the stove, remembering something he'd read about mixing it with egg yolk for orphaned animals. In his bathroom cabinet, he found an old eyedropper from when he'd had pink eye last summer. "Easy now," he coaxed, carefully, dropping tiny amounts of the mixture into the kitten's mouth. At first, it seemed too weak to swallow, but gradually survival instinct took over. Each successful swallow felt like a small victory. The next morning, word of Caleb's rescue spread through town like wildfire. It started with Earl from the hardware store, who'd stopped by to drop off some plumbing supplies. "Have you lost your mind, Caleb?" Earl stood in the doorway, shaking his head at the makeshift nest Caleb had created from an old blanket. "There's a wild animal, probably carrying all sorts of diseases. Couldn't just let it die, Earl?" Caleb continued preparing another batch of the milk mixture, his movements precise despite his lack of sleep. "You've got enough troubles without taking on more strays," Earl persisted. "Bank's breathing down your neck. Business ain't what it used to be, and here you are playing nursemaid to a bobcat? More visitors followed throughout the day, each bearing similar warnings. Sarah from the diner brought him a coffee and a lecture about rabies. Mike, his oldest customer, reminded him about his cousin who'd been scratched by a raccoon and needed 14 shots. But Caleb remained focused on his tiny patient. The kitten's eyes looked clearer now, and it had started making small movements trying to lift its head. Each small sign of improvement filled him with a satisfaction he couldn't quite explain. By afternoon, he'd contacted the nearest wildlife rescue center. 40 miles away in Pine Bluff, they agreed to send someone the next morning. That evening, as Caleb sat beside the makeshift nest, he found himself talking to the kitten. "You and me, we're both hanging on by a thread, aren't we?" The kitten's ears twitched at his voice. "Everyone's got an opinion about what we should do, but they don't know what it's like." He gently stroked the kitten's head with one finger, marveling at how it had started 2 per weekly. Sometimes you just need someone to give you a chance, right? Just one person to believe in you when everything looks hopeless. The wildlife rescue worker arrived early the next morning. She was a young woman named Jenny, with kind eyes and capable hands. She examined the kitten carefully, her expression growing increasingly impressed. "You did good, Mr. Harlow," she said, checking the kitten's vital signs. "Another day out there, and this little one wouldn't have made it. What intervention made all the difference?" As Jenny prepared to leave with the kitten, Caleb felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. He helped her pack the carrier with the blanket the kitten had been using, making sure it was secure and warm. "Will it?" he started, then cleared his throat. "Will it be okay?" Jenny smiled warmly. "Thanks to you, this little fighter has a real chance now. We'll rehabilitate it properly, make sure it learns to hunt, and when it's ready, we'll release it back into the wild where it belongs." Caleb nodded, knowing this was the right thing to do. Still, as he watched Jenny carry the carrier to her truck, he felt a deep sense of loss. The kitten had been in his care for less than 2 days, but their connection had felt profound, 2 struggling souls finding each other in the darkness. "Goodbye, little fighter," he whispered as the truck pulled away, kicking up dust on his gravel driveway. The morning sun cast long shadows across his yard, and the autumn wind carried the first real bite of winter. His neighbor's words echoed in his mind about wasted energy, about foolish choices, about focusing on lost causes. But standing there watching until the truck disappeared around the bend, Caleb felt no regret. In helping that small creature fight for survival, he'd found something he thought he'd lost, a reminder of his own resilience, his own will too. Keep going when everything seemed stacked against him. He turned back toward his house, knowing there were bills to sort through and repairs waiting at the shop. The kitten was gone, their brief connection severed, but something of its fighting spirit stayed with him. Sometimes he realized the most meaningful encounters were the ones you never saw coming. Even if they lasted only a moment, 3 years crawled by like molasses in winter. Caleb's auto shop, once bustling with the steady hum of engines and friendly chatter, now stood quiet more often than not. The worn sign above the entrance swayed in the Arkansas breeze, its paint peeling at the edges a mirror of Caleb's fading hopes. He sat at his desk, staring at a stack of unpaid bills illuminated by the weak morning sun. The numbers blurred together, but their message was crystal clear. The bank's latest notice lay on top, printed on paper so white it hurt. His eyes, final warning stretched across the top in bold. Letters that seemed to mock his situation. The bell above the shop door chimed, drawing Caleb from his thoughts. Through the grimy office window, he spotted a sleek black car that looked out of place among the rusty pickups, usually parked outside. The vehicle probably cost more than his entire year's earnings. A tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stepped into the shop, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor. Everything about him screamed city money, from his perfectly trimmed salt and pepper hair to his gold watch that caught the light with every movement. "Mr. Harlow?" The man's voice carried the smooth confidence of someone used to getting his way. "I'm Russell Crane. I believe you received my letters." Caleb stood slowly, wiping his oil-stained hands on his coveralls. "I got them." Wasn't interested enough to respond. Crane's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I thought a face-to-face conversation might be more productive." He glanced around the shop, taking in the tired equipment and empty service bays. "Times are tough, aren't they?" I manage. Caleb crossed his arms, feeling defensive under Crane's calculating gaze. "Do you?" Crane pulled out a leather folder from his briefcase. "According to my sources, you're 3 months behind on your mortgage." The bank's patience won't last forever. A chill ran down Caleb's spine. Been talking to people about my business, have you? I make it my business to know everything about properties I'm interested in. Crane laid the folder on Caleb's desk, spreading out papers filled with numbers and legal terms, prepared to offer you a way out. $300,000 for the land and buildings. That's more than fair considering the market and your current situation. Caleb's throat tightened. The amount would clear his debts with enough left over to start fresh somewhere else. But this land had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had built the shop with his own hands, teaching Caleb everything he knew about engines and honest work. Not interested, Caleb said firmly, pushing the papers back toward Crane. The developer's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. Mr. Harlow, I don't think you understand the position you're in. This area is changing. Progress is coming, whether you like it or not. You can either profit from it or get swept aside. Is that a threat? Simply a reality check, Crane gathered. His papers with precise movements. I'm trying to help you, Mr. Harlow. Others might not be so generous. He pulled out a business card, placing it deliberately on the desk. Think about your future, about what's practical. You can't hold back time any more than you can fix every broken thing that comes your way. Something in those words struck deep, reminding Caleb of the tiny Bobcat Kitten he'd saved years ago. He'd never known what became of it after the wildlife rescue took it away. Sometimes he wondered if trying to help had made any difference at all. Crane moved toward the door, then paused. You have 1 week to reconsider my offer. After that, well, he shrugged, the gesture calculated to appear casual while carrying clear menace. The bank might be interested in discussing their options with a more cooperative buyer. The bell chimed again as Crane left, but its cheerful sound felt wrong in the heavy silence he left behind. Caleb watched through the window as the expensive car pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. That evening, Caleb sat on his front porch, nursing a cup of coffee, gone cold. The sun was setting behind the trees that marked the edge of his property, trees his grandfather had climbed as a boy. Trees his father had built tree houses in, trees that had sheltered generations of Harlows. The night was filled with the familiar sounds of crickets and distant frogs, but Caleb barely heard them. Crane's words echoed in his mind, mixing with memories of his father's voice. This land is our heritage, son. More than dirt and trees. It's who we are. But who was he now? A failing mechanic, barely keeping his head above water, holding on to the past while the world changed around him. The weight of his situation pressed down on him like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. In the growing darkness, a bobcat's cry echoed from the distant woods. The sound stirred something in Caleb's chest, a memory of tiny paws and desperate eyes, of choosing compassion over practicality. He'd never regretted saving that kitten, even though everyone said it was foolish. Some things were worth fighting. For even when the odds seemed impossible, Caleb stood, his decision solidifying like steel being tempered. Crane might have money and power, but this land held something money couldn't buy. Generations of memories, the essence of who he was. He wouldn't let it go without a fight, even if he had to face this battle alone. The business card Crane had left still sat in his pocket, feeling like a burning coal against his leg. Caleb pulled it out, studying the embossed letters in the fading light. Then, with deliberate movements, he tore it into tiny pieces and let them scatter in the evening breeze. Let Crane come with his threats and his money. Some things weren't for sale, no matter the price. The developer's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. Mr. Harlow, I don't think you understand the position you're in. This area is changing. Progress is inevitable. You can either profit from it, or he let the threat hang in the air. I think we're done here, Caleb said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Crane gathered his papers with deliberate slowness. Think it over. My offer won't last forever. With that, he left the bell's cheerful ring, a stark contrast to the heavy silence he left behind. Over the next few weeks, Caleb noticed small changes around his property. Fresh tire tracks appeared in places where no vehicle should be. One morning, he found his workshop's padlock damaged, though nothing was missing inside. His old dog, Buck, started barking at shadows more often than usual. Then one gray Tuesday morning, Buck didn't come when Caleb called for breakfast. The metal food bowl sat untouched, collecting dew as Caleb searched the property with growing panic. He whistled until his lips were raw, his voice growing hoarse from calling the dogs. "Name Buck. Where are you, boy?" His boots crunched through the fallen leaves as he combed through the woods behind his house. The autumn air bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. All he could think about was his faithful companion, the one constant in his increasingly unstable life. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, casting dappled shadows through the trees. Caleb's worry twisted into something darker, a suspicion that this wasn't just a case of a dog wandering off. He'd seen Crane's black car cruising past his property too many times lately for it to be coincidence. Just when his legs were about to give out from exhaustion, familiar bark echoed through the trees. Caleb's heart leaped as Buck came bounding toward him, tail wagging, acting as if he'd just been on a pleasant morning stroll. "You old rascal," Caleb muttered, dropping to his knees to hug the dog. "Don't you ever scare me like that again?" But the relief was short-lived. That evening, after Buck was safely home and fed, the weight of everything crashed down on Caleb's shoulders. The failing business, the mounting bills, Cranes, threats, the mysterious disturbances, it all felt like too much. He found himself walking into the woods again, this time without purpose or destination. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, but Caleb barely noticed its beauty. His feet carried him deeper into the forest. Following a path he hadn't taken in years, the memories came flooding back, the weak cries that had drawn him here that night. The tiny Bobcat Kitten he'd found, so desperate for help. He remembered how it had trembled in his hands as he fed it, how its trust had seemed like a precious gift. "What am I doing?" he whispered to himself, running a hand over his tired face. Maybe Crane's right. Maybe it's time to let go. Twig snapped behind him. Caleb turned slowly, expecting to see Buck following him. Instead, his breath caught in his throat. There, not 20 feet away, stood a full-grown bobcat. Its muscular frame spoke of years of survival in these woods. Scars marked its face and shoulders, telling stories of battles won and lost. But it was the eyes that held Caleb frozen in place, amber eyes that seemed to glow in the fading light, filled with an intelligence that struck him to his core. "It can't be," he breathed. The bobcat took a step closer, its movements fluid and purposeful. Caleb's mind screamed at him to back away. This was a wild predator, not the helpless kitten he'd once known, but something deeper than reason kept. Him rooted to the spot, the creature stopped just a few yards away, its tail twitching slightly, tilted its head, studying him with those remarkable eyes. In that moment, Caleb felt the years fall away. He remembered the trust that had formed between them, however briefly, on that long-ago night. "Is it really you?" he whispered. The bobcat's ear twitched at the sound of his voice. Then, in a gesture that sent chills down Caleb's spine, it slowly blinked at him, a sign of trust among cats. The same way the tiny kitten had blinked at him after its first meal. Tears pricked at Caleb's eyes. Against all odds, against all reason, the creature he'd helped had not only survived, but thrived. The weak, desperate kitten had grown into this magnificent animal, wearing its scars like badges of honor. The bobcat held his gaze for another long moment, and Caleb felt something shift inside him. The despair that had driven him into these woods began to lift, replaced by something that felt almost like hope. If this creature could survive and grow stronger through all the challenges it had faced, maybe he could too. Without warning, the bobcat turned and melted into the underbrush, leaving Caleb standing alone in the growing darkness. But he didn't feel alone anymore. The encounter had awakened something in him, a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could lead to extraordinary results. He stood there for a long while, watching the spot where the bobcat had disappeared, feeling the weight of the moment settle into his bones. The woods around him seemed different now, charged with possibility rather than despair. Caleb froze mid-step. There, not 20 feet away, stood a magnificent bobcat. The creature's amber eyes locked onto His and Caleb's breath caught in his throat. It was larger than he remembered, its muscular frame speaking of years of survival in the wild. A distinctive scar ran across its left ear, the same mark it had carried as a kitten from whatever ordeal had nearly claimed its life. "It can't be," Caleb whispered. But he knew in his heart that this was the same animal he'd saved years ago. The bobcat held his gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked deeper into the woods. After a few steps, it looked back at him as if waiting. Caleb felt an inexplicable pull to follow. "This is crazy," he muttered to himself, but his feet were already moving. The bobcat led him through paths he'd never noticed before, moving with purpose. Whenever Caleb fell too far behind, it would pause, those intelligent eyes never leaving his face. The forest grew denser, the undergrowth more tangled. Branches caught at his jacket as he pushed through. The bobcat moved like a shadow, easily navigating the difficult terrain. After about 15 minutes of walking, it stopped abruptly, its ears twitching forward. Caleb nearly stumbled when he saw what lay ahead. Hidden among the trees was a crude clearing, and scattered throughout were metal snares and cage traps. His stomach turned as he spotted dried blood on several of them. These weren't the humane traps used by licensed wildlife officers. These were cruel devices designed to maim and capture. "Dear God," he breathed, pulling out his phone to document what he was seeing. The bobcat watched him from the edge of the clearing, its tail twitching with agitation. As Caleb carefully photographed the illegal traps, he noticed something else: fresh tire tracks leading away from the clearing. Following them with his eyes, he spotted what looked like a tarp partially hidden behind a fallen tree. The bobcat was already moving in that direction. Caleb followed, his heart pounding. When he pulled back the heavy tarp, he found several large wooden crates stacked together. They were the kind used for shipping, complete with air holes, the type that could hold live animals. "What in the world?" Caleb muttered, examining the crates more closely. Most were empty, but one contained something that made his blood run cold. Papers. Shipping manifests, invoices, and handwritten notes. All scattered as if someone had hastily stuffed them inside. With trembling hands, Caleb began to read. The documents revealed a sophisticated operation: dates, locations, prices for various species, bears, wolves, exotic birds, even endangered species. And there, repeated throughout the paperwork, was a name he recognized all too well: Russell Crane. The bobcat made a low sound, drawing Caleb's attention to more papers that had fallen beneath the crates. These were different bank statements and property documents showing how Crane had been using his legitimate business dealings to cover up his illegal wildlife trafficking operation. Caleb's mind raced as he connected the dots. The constant pressure to sell his land, the mysterious disturbances, Buck's temporary disappearance, it all made sense now. His property wasn't just valuable for development. It was a crucial location for Crane's illegal activities. The sound of a branch snapping in the distance made both Caleb and the bobcat freeze. Voices carried faintly through the trees, men talking, getting closer. The bobcat's muscles tensed, ready to flee, but it waited until Caleb had quickly gathered as much evidence as he could stuff into his jacket pockets. Without a word, Caleb followed the bobcat away from the clearing, taking a different route than they'd come. The animal moved swiftly but carefully, choosing paths that left minimal traces of their passage. They could hear the voices growing more distinct behind them, accompanied by the sound of heavy boots crushing leaves. "Check the traps," a gruff voice commanded. "Boss wants any new catches processed tonight?" Caleb's heart hammered in his chest as he crouched behind a thick oak tree, waiting for the voices to fade. The bobcat remained perfectly still beside him, its presence somehow reassuring despite its wild nature. Once the danger had passed, they continued their careful retreat. The bobcat led him through a series of natural landmarks: a lightning-struck tree, distinctive rock formation, a small stream, until they finally emerged near the edge of his property. In the growing darkness, Caleb could see his workshop in the distance, its familiar silhouette a welcome sight. He turned to thank the bobcat, but the creature was already melting back into the shadows of the forest. Just before it disappeared completely, it looked back one final time. those intelligent eyes seeming to convey a message. The truth was out now, and there was no turning back. Caleb patted his jacket pockets, feeling the weight of the documents inside. His hands were shaking, but his mind was clear. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond despair. He felt purpose. Crane's empire of cruelty had been built on the suffering of innocent creatures, and now Caleb had the evidence. To bring it all crashing down, the same compassion that had driven him to save a starving kitten years ago now fueled his resolve. He knew what he had to do with this evidence, even though exposing Crane would make him an even bigger target. As he walked back to his house, Caleb could still feel those amber eyes watching over him, reminding him that sometimes the greatest acts of courage start with a single moment of kindness. Caleb's hands shook as he photographed the last of the documents. The weight of what he'd discovered pressed down on him like a physical force. These weren't just shipping manifests. They were evidence of organized crime. Russell Crane, the man who'd been threatening to take his land, was running an illegal wildlife trafficking operation. Right here in their quiet corner of Arkansas, the bobcat paced restlessly at the edge of the clearing, its tail twitching with nervous energy. Caleb understood the feeling. What he held in his hands could destroy Crane, but it could also put him in serious danger. "What do I do with this?" he muttered, carefully tucking several key documents into his jacket. The rest he photographed methodically, making sure each image was clear enough to read. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. A twig snapped in the distance. The bobcat's head jerked up, its ears swiveling toward the sound. Caleb froze, his heart thundering in his chest. Another crack echoed through the trees, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of men's voices. "It's got to be around here somewhere," a gruff voice called out. Boss said, "Check all the usual spots." Caleb quickly zipped his jacket, securing the documents against his chest. The bobcat melted into the underbrush, but its eyes remained fixed on him, gleaming with an almost human intelligence. "Hey!" The shout made Caleb jump. Two men emerged from the trees, both wearing dark jackets with Crane Development logos. The larger one, a burly man with a shaved head, pointed at Caleb. "What are you doing out here, Harlow?" "Ah!" Caleb's mouth went dry. He recognized them from Crane's previous visits to his property. The smaller one, wire-thin with a face like a ferret, was already pulling out his phone. "Just taking a walk," Caleb said, trying to keep his voice steady. "These woods back up to my property." "This ain't your property," the big one growled, advancing. Toward him, "You're trespassing on Crane Development land." "Funny," Caleb said, backing away slowly. "I don't see any posted signs. And last I checked, this was still county forest." The ferret-faced man spoke into his phone. "Yeah, boss. We found him. He's at the north side." Paused, listening. "Copy that." The large man cracked his knuckles. "Mr. Crane wants to have a word with you about staying where you belong." "I'll pass on the invitation," Caleb said, continuing to edge backward. His heel caught on a root, nearly sending him sprawling. This wasn't an invitation. The big man lunged forward, grabbing for Caleb's jacket. A blur of motion erupted from the underbrush. The bobcat launched itself between them, its powerful body coiled. With deadly grace, a bone-chilling snarl filled the clearing as it faced down the two men, its teeth bared in warning. Jesus Christ. The ferret-faced man stumbled backward, dropping his phone. His companion retreated several steps, face pale beneath his tough guy exterior. Caleb seized the moment. He turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth. Behind him, he heard shouting and cursing, followed by another savage growl from the bobcat. He didn't slow down to look back, focusing instead on putting as much distance between himself and Crane's men as possible. Branches whipped at his face as he ran. His lungs burned, and the documents crinkled against his chest with each pounding step. He could hear pursuit behind him, crashes through the brush. Angry voices calling out directions to each other. A flash of tawny fur caught his eye. The bobcat was running parallel to him, somehow keeping pace while staying just visible enough to guide him. When Caleb would have turned right, the creature cut across his path, directing him left instead. Understanding dawned through his panic. The bobcat wasn't just running alongside him, it was leading him to safety. He followed its guidance. Ducking under low-hanging branches and skirting around dense thickets that would have slowed him down, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter. The bobcat led him through a shallow creek, the cold water soaking his boots, but helping to mask their trail. After what felt like miles, they emerged near the edge of his own property. Caleb bent over, hands on his knees, gasping for breath. The bobcat sat watching him from a few yards away, its sides barely heaving despite their desperate flight. Caleb straightened up. He could have sworn he saw approval in those intelligent eyes. "Thank you," he wheezed. "I don't know how you knew, but thank you." The bobcat's ears twitched at his voice. It held his gaze for a long moment, then melted away into the gathering dusk, leaving Caleb alone with his racing thoughts and the damning evidence pressed against his chest. His hands were still shaking as he pulled out the documents. In the fading light, he could make out dates, locations, and dollar amounts that made his eyes widen. This was bigger than just Crane trying to force him off his land. This was organized crime, reaching far beyond their small community. The sound of distant vehicles starting up somewhere in the forest made him jump. Crane's men weren't done looking for him. They'd be back, and next time they'd be better prepared. The confrontation in the clearing had made one thing crystal clear. This wasn't just about land anymore. By discovering their operation, he'd put himself in real danger. Caleb carefully tucked the documents back into his jacket and hurried toward his house. He needed to figure out his next move quickly. The evidence he carried could bring down Crane's entire operation, but it could also get him killed if he wasn't careful. The weight of the decision pressed down on him as he walked, along with the realization that his life had irrevocably changed in the space of a single afternoon. The bobcat's intervention had saved him today, but he couldn't count on such protection forever. As he reached his back porch, Caleb realized he was now caught up in something far bigger and more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The simple act of kindness he'd shown years ago, feeding a starving kitten, had set him on a path he'd never could have predicted, one that now put him directly in the crosshairs of powerful and dangerous men. Caleb's hands trembled as he spread the documents across his kitchen table. His breath was still coming in ragged gasps from the chase, and his clothes were damp with sweat and creek water. The late afternoon sun slanted through his window, illuminating the scattered papers like pieces of a dark puzzle. The bobcat sat in his doorway, its powerful frame blocking the entrance as if standing guard. Every few minutes, its ears would twitch, monitoring the sounds outside. The creature's presence should have seemed bizarre, a wild predator casually lounging in his door frame, but somehow it felt right, like pieces of a larger picture finally clicking into place. "This is bigger than just my land, isn't it?" La murmured, more to himself than the bobcat. But those intelligent amber eyes fixed on him, seeming to understand. His fingers traced over shipping manifests, bank statements, and carefully coded ledgers. At first glance, they looked like normal business documents for Crane development. But as Caleb began connecting the dots, his stomach turned. The shipping routes traced patterns across 3 states, all leading to private airfields. The numbers in the ledgers were astronomical, millions of dollars flowing through shell companies. And the codes, Caleb's heart sank as he deciphered them. Each one represented different species: bears, wolves, big cats, even endangered animals that shouldn't be anywhere near Arkansas. "That's why you came back," he said softly, looking at the bobcat. "You weren't just passing through. You knew what was happening out there." The bobcat's tail twitched, its gaze unwavering. Caleb remembered how deliberately it had led him to those hidden crates in the forest, how it had positioned itself between him and danger when Crane's men appeared. His hands found a particularly damning document, a detailed inventory of merchandise that made his blood run cold. Young animals taken from their mothers, rare species captured and sold to private collectors, even animal parts destined for black markets overseas. The cruelty of it all struck him like a physical blow. $3.5 million, he read aloud, his voice shaking with anger. That's what Crane made just last quarter from this nightmare. The scope of it was staggering. Crane wasn't just some greedy developer trying to squeeze out local landowners. He was running an elaborate wildlife trafficking operation, using his legitimate business as cover. The land grabs the pressure on small property owners like Caleb. It was all to expand his hunting grounds and storage facilities. Caleb thought about all the missing pets in the area over the years, the declining wildlife populations that everyone blamed on natural causes. He remembered the strange sounds in the night that people dismissed, the unusual truck traffic on back roads that no one questioned because they carried Crane Development logos. "We've all been blind," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Or maybe we just didn't want to see." The bobcat stood suddenly, muscles rippling under its scarred coat. It padded over to the table, its presence commanding Caleb's attention. Looking into those eyes, Caleb saw something that went beyond animal instinct. There was purpose there, and an almost desperate intensity. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just about survival anymore, not for either of them. That little starving kitten he'd saved years ago hadn't returned by chance. It had come back with a mission, choosing him because of that one act of compassion when everyone else would have walked away. "You trusted me then," Caleb said softly, "when you were small and helpless. Now you're trusting me with this." He gestured at the damning evidence spread across his table. "You knew I'd understand what it meant, what it would make me do." The bobcat made a low sound in its throat, almost like a purr, but rougher, deeper. It pressed its massive head against Caleb's hand for just a moment, a gesture so unexpected it brought tears to his eyes. Caleb's fear from earlier began to transform into something else, determination. The weight of the responsibility settled over him, but instead of crushing him, it straightened his spine. His financial troubles, his worry about losing his land, all of it seemed smaller in the face of what he'd discovered. "This stops," he said firmly, gathering the documents into a careful order. "I don't know exactly how yet, but this stops. No more animals vanishing. No more turning a blind eye because we're afraid of Crane's money and influence." The bobcat's ears perked forward, its posture alert and ready. Caleb couldn't help but smile at its response, despite the gravity of the situation. Here he was, a struggling mechanic with more debts than dollars, plotting to take down a millionaire. Criminal with a wild bobcat as his only ally. It should have seemed ridiculous, impossible even. But looking at the evidence before him, feeling the righteous anger burning in his chest, and seeing the trust in those amber eyes, Caleb knew with absolute certainty that he was meant to do this. That long-ago act of kindness hadn't just saved a kitten, it had set in motion something much larger, something that was finally coming full circle. "Okay," he said, squaring his shoulders. "Let's figure out how to bring him down." Caleb spent the next 2 days meticulously organizing the evidence. His small kitchen became a makeshift command center, with documents sorted into neat piles and photos taped to the walls. The bobcat maintained its vigilant watch, sometimes disappearing into the woods only to return hours later, as if patrolling an invisible boundary. "I've got enough here to put Crane away for years," Caleb muttered, carefully placing the most damning documents into a thick manila envelope. His hands were steady now, his fear replaced by a quiet determination. He'd made copies of everything, storing them in different locations, his shop, his truck, and even buried in a waterproof container behind his shed. The sound of tires on gravel made him freeze. Through his window, he saw a black SUV crawling past his property, moving too slow to be casual traffic. The bobcat's ears flattened against its head, a low growl rumbling in its chest. "They're watching," Caleb said softly, "but they don't know what we have." That night, Caleb could barely sleep. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him like a physical thing. He'd contacted a journalist from the state capitol and arranged to meet her the next morning. Everything was in place. He should have felt confident, maybe even triumphant. Instead, an uneasy feeling gnawed at his gut. The explosion woke him just before dawn. The sound ripped through the quiet morning like a thunderclap, followed by the sharp crack of splitting wood. Caleb bolted upright in bed, his heart hammering. Through his bedroom window, he saw an orange glow painting the sky. They'd set the forest on fire. Caleb scrambled into his clothes, grabbed his pre-packed bag with the evidence, and ran outside. The smell of smoke hit him like a wall. Flames were already climbing the trees at the edge of his property, spreading with terrifying speed in the dry summer air. The bobcat appeared beside him, its fur bristling. More explosions echoed through the woods. They weren't just starting one fire, they were creating a ring of them, trying to trap him. "You have to get out of here," Caleb said, coughing as smoke began to thicken the air. He ran for his truck, but another explosion rocked the ground nearby, sending him stumbling. Through the growing haze, he saw dark figures moving in the tree line, carrying what looked like gas cans and flare guns. The bobcat snarled, its muscles tensing. Before Caleb could stop it, the creature launched itself toward the nearest figure. A shout of pain and fear cut through the roar of the flames. Caleb used the distraction to run. But not toward his truck. They'd be watching for that. Instead, he plunged into the smoke-filled woods, hoping his lifetime of knowledge of these lands would give him an advantage. The heat was becoming unbearable. Burning branches crashed down around him as he weaved through the trees, trying to stay ahead of the spreading flames. His lungs burned with every breath, and his eyes stung from the smoke. A shot rang out, splintering bark near his head. Were hunting him now, using the fire to flush him into their trap. Caleb ducked and changed direction, heading for the creek that ran through his property. If he could reach it, another explosion, closer this time? The force of it threw him forward, and he lost his footing on the leaf-strewn ground. He tumbled down a small embankment, landing hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. The bag, with the evidence, flew from his grasp, sliding away into the underbrush, gasping. Caleb crawled toward where he thought the bag had landed. The smoke was so thick now, he could barely see 3 feet in front of him. The roar of the fire seemed to come from everywhere at once, and he could hear shouts getting closer. His hand touched something. Not the bag, but fur. The bobcat had found him again. It nudged him urgently, trying to guide him in a particular direction. But Caleb couldn't leave without the evidence. He had to find it. The bag, he wheezed, still searching blindly. "We have to. A massive tree crashed down nearby, sending up a shower of sparks." The heat was becoming unbearable, and Caleb could feel his strength failing. His head was spinning from lack of oxygen, and his vision was starting to dim at the edges. The bobcat bit down on his sleeve, trying to pull him away, but Caleb resisted. Without the evidence, it would all be for nothing. Crane would win. The animals would keep suffering. His land, his home, everything he'd fought for would be lost. Another explosion rocked the forest, and this time Caleb heard the distinct crack of breaking wood above him. He looked up through the smoke to see a burning branch the size of a car, plummeting toward him. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. He could see every spark, every ember, every tongue of flame reaching for him like hungry fingers. This was it. He had failed. The last thing he felt was the bobcat's powerful jaws clamping down on his collar, yanking him with desperate strength. Then everything went black as the burning forest crashed down around them. Consciousness returned slowly to Caleb. His head throbbed, and every breath felt like inhaling fire. He was alive. Through blurry vision, he made out the bobcat's form standing guard nearby. Somehow the creature had dragged him to safety near the creek bed. The evidence bag lay half buried in mud beside him. Caleb's trembling hands retrieved the most crucial documents: photos of Crane's illegal holding facilities and financial records linking him directly to the wildlife trafficking ring. Tucked them securely into his jacket. Through the smoke, a figure emerged. Russell Crane himself, suit jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up, holding a hunting rifle. His face was twisted with rage and desperation. "You're more stubborn than I expected, Harlow," Crane spat, raising the rifle. "But this ends now." Caleb struggled to his feet, swaying. "It's over, Crane. The evidence is already backed up. You can't hide anymore." Crane's response was to squeeze the trigger. The shot went wide as Caleb dove behind a fallen tree. His body screamed in protest, but survival instinct kept him moving. "I built everything from nothing," Crane shouted, advancing. "I won't let some backwoods mechanic take it all away." Another shot splintered wood near Caleb's head. He tried to run but stumbled, his legs giving out. Crane stood over him, rifle aimed at his chest. The bobcat launched itself from nowhere, a blur of fur and fury. It slammed into Crane with enough. Forced to send the rifle flying, Man and beast went down in a tangle of limbs and snarls. The bobcat's claws raked Crane's face as he screamed in terror. Caleb seized his chance. He grabbed the fallen rifle and trained it on Crane's approaching men, who froze in their tracks. In the distance, sirens wailed. The forest fire had drawn emergency responders. "It's done," Caleb said firmly, as the bobcat stood beside him, both of them facing down Crane and his thugs. "Hey, your empire ends here." The flashing lights of police cars illuminated the smoky forest clearing. Crane's face, bloodied from the bobcat's attack, contorted with rage as officers led him away in handcuffs. His men, too, were rounded up, their years of intimidation and cruelty finally at an end. "We've been building a case against Crane for months," the lead investigator told Caleb. "Your evidence was the final piece we needed. The trafficking ring, the land grabs, it's all coming down." In the following weeks, as headlines announced Crane's arrest and the scope of his crimes, Caleb watched his world transform. The bank, eager to distance itself from Crane's scandal, restructured his loans. His land was safe. Former victims of Crane's schemes came forward, sharing stories that mirrored his own. One quiet evening, as sunset painted the sky in amber hues, Caleb spotted the bobcat at the forest's edge. Their eyes met across the distance, the same connection he'd felt years ago with that starving kitten, now full circle. The creature's presence had changed him, showing him that compassion wasn't weakness, but the greatest strength of all. The bobcat turned, padding silently into the deepening shadows. This time, Caleb didn't feel loss as he watched it go. Instead, his heart swelled with understanding. He stood straighter, shoulders unburdened, finally seeing himself not as the man who'd almost lost everything, but as someone who'd found his true worth by daring to care. If tonight's story sat quietly in your heart, subscribe and send it to someone who might need the same comfort.